go ahead and dive in and start explaining that concept, Jonathan.
That's a big part of how Wall Street's been running us into a ditch for the last 30
The debt ceiling is not some sort of macroeconomic concept.
The U.S. isn't really a great place, and it's not really the land of the free.
Get 1,000 people together and let's go lay siege to City Hall.
Hello to all of the real progressives out there. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I apologize for my tardiness today. I was at work and rushed home to put the show together. Realized when I went to hit go live that all of my articles were disheveled and out of order. So I very much apologize for my tardiness today. I do want to start with the plugs as usual. You guys go to realprogressives.org to learn more about us or contribute at realprogressives.org/donate. We are a nonprofit and we appreciate any contribution that you can give. We're going to talk a little bit today about framing of federal spending, and MMT is one of the big things that we try to educate on. Just anything you can do to help us out. You can find all of our content there, all of our podcasts, all of our fantastic articles, realprogressives.org and realprogressives.org/donate. Also want to plug, I put this in the description box. There is a tweet that you all should go like and retweet. And then from there, you can also sign up if you'd like to go to an event this Wednesday, helping to fundraise for March for Medicare for All and their week of action culminating on July 30th with a march in Washington, D.C. Again, that's in the description box. Go check that tweet out for details on how to get involved and sign up on Eventbrite for Wednesdays. It's a music trivia night. So if you're interested in contributing to a great cause and having fun doing some music trivia, go check out that tweet in the description box and help Medicare, M4M4ALL, excuse me, any way you can, M4M4ALL.org to learn more about them. So we're going to start off today talking a little bit. Give me just 1 second here. We're going to start off today talking about the framing of federal finance. Ro Khanna, a very well-known progressive in the House. I think he's kind of progressive, but when he does stuff like this, it really, really pisses me off. So we're going to show you a tweet that he put out earlier today. Give me just 1 second, you guys. I'm so sorry. Share screen. There we go. So this is, I retweet him. He says, cancel student debt and pay for it with a billionaire tax and transaction tax on Wall Street speculation. So the pay for is obviously the problem here to any of you who know MMT basics. At the federal level, taxes do not pay for spending. The currency issuer creates new dollars when it creates, or in our case, dollars creates new currency when it creates, and eliminates that currency from the economy when it taxes. So there is no way that you can pay for a federal spending bill with tax dollars. Taxes eliminate dollars, spending creates new dollars. Okay, that framing is, it might sound nitpicky, you guys, to anybody who hasn't really engaged much with MMT. The reason it matters so much is that the only arguments against robust spending programs that would help the poor and middle class, is the working class, etc. The only arguments against those kinds of programs, things like Medicare for All, things like a Green New Deal, things like canceling student debt, things like tuition-free college and new infrastructure and all these kinds of things that we talk about, housing reform, etc., etc. The only arguments against those programs, conservatives cannot argue against them on the merits. So what they have to do is do the how are you going to pay for it game. Well, if we just concede the framing to their neoliberal nonsense, which is not accurate, that is that taxes pay for things at the federal level. If we're conceding that ground to them, then we're much less likely to win the argument as it pertains to the rest of the population who might listen into that argument, right? So when we're having these narrative battles, we don't want to concede framing to the other side unnecessarily and arm them when our arguments are flat out stronger. If they have to argue against healthcare on the merits, how are they going to win? No, 3/4 or more of this country already supports Medicare for All, even though most of those people misunderstand federal finance, right? So when they have to argue on the merits, they lose. The only thing they can say is, how are you going to pay for it? And then they fearmonger about taxation, right? Oh, you're going to pay higher taxes if you pass these programs. So we can cut directly through the only argument that is in any way effective for conservatives against these social spending programs by simply disallowing them from misframing the argument. And I'm incredibly disappointed to once again see Ro Khanna framing it in the incorrect way. My response here was taxes do not pay for federal spending, and this sort of neoliberal framing is incredibly harmful to the left. We must tax the rich for a myriad of reasons, but we also must decouple tax policy from discussions about spending at the federal level. So Ro Khanna is somebody who I believe does understand at least the rudimentary level of MMT. And yet continues to frame things in this ridiculous, incorrect, and harmful way. And I think that's really too bad. I wish that these so-called progressives would hop on board with framing things not only accurately, but in a way that is more beneficial to the left and to achieving the policies that we all would like to achieve. So if you're unfamiliar with MMT, please do go to realprogressives.org. We have all sorts of educational content there. You guys watch the Macro and Cheese podcast with our founder and CEO, Steve Grumbine, which comes out on Saturdays. MMT is very important for people to understand. I know it sounds really dry and boring to a lot of people to talk about macroeconomics. It is really, really important to understand when we engage in these political battles and when we try to frame our narrative in the most effective possible way. And an ineffective strategy is to concede the grounds that taxes pay for federal spending. They do not. They simply do not. And I wish that Ro Khanna and his colleagues would stop engaging in such harmful and incorrect framing. So we're going to talk a little bit about the total lunacy that has gone on at the Supreme Court since I last did a show a few weeks ago. Not that this is terribly surprising. I think anybody who's paid attention for any length of time kind of understands that the Supreme Court is not exactly what most people make it out to be. But it certainly has been, this particular court sort of, lifting the veil on some of that, so to say, right? So we're going to show a tweet here. This is from Sawyer Hockett. In one term, the extremist Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, guts Miranda rights, ends regulations on open carry of guns, allows prayer in schools by employees, and ends federal regulation of greenhouse gases. I do want to give one caveat on, he says guts Miranda rights. There's a little bit of a technicality that kind of matters there. Cops do still have to Mirandize you. That didn't change. What changed is whether or not you can sue a cop for not Mirandizing you, if I understand that correctly. So there is a little bit of a caveat on that one, but all of these things pretty terrible, right? I'm moderate on guns, but all of these things seem pretty absurd and ridiculous, and the precedent that has been set, especially in the Dobbs decision there that overturned Roe v. Wade, could be quite catastrophic. And speaking of that decision in particular, Elie Mystal, who is a regular political commentator and has done some segments about the Democrats' inaction as it pertains to codifying Roe v. Wade for 40 years as it happens. But he's talking specifically about their unwillingness to respond to the Dobbs decision. He says, I'm really not going to stay here all night and deal with all you. But what can Biden do? Biden can do nothing, people. I can't spoon feed everything. Here are some of my writings on the subject since September. Have a blessed weekend. So he shares the articles that he has written on all of the things that Joe Biden could potentially be doing here. Obviously, there are a number of avenues, right? He could encourage his party to codify it through Congress. This court could still theoretically overturn that, depending on how it interpreted the law. But that is one route that they have neglected for 40 years, to even attempt to codify Roe through legislation. Other options include stacking the court, quite frankly. The last time that the Supreme Court expanded, it expanded to 9 because we had grown to 9 circuits, nine circuits of appellate courts, right? Now we have 13. So there's a pretty solid argument to say, let's just expand the court to 13 justices. He could do that. He could put 4 people who I have no doubt would be very friendly to corporations and the business community and banks, but he could put 4 people up that would disagree with the Dobbs decision, and that would at least address this particular issue if it was run through the courts once again. There really are a number of people have even floated that there are a few justices on the court who could be impeached. I don't know if that would be successful. I think that's kind of a dubious argument, to be honest with you, because I don't think the justices necessarily lied at their hearings. I think they dodged the question, and everybody who believed them was naive to. When they say something like, Roe is the law or something to that effect, that doesn't mean they can't rule in a different direction, right? All they're saying is it currently is the law of the land. So there are ways that they framed those questions during their confirmation hearings that I think were more just to dodge the question. And I think anybody who wanted to hear them say, I will not overturn Roe, may have heard them say that. So I don't know how much grounds there would be to impeach the justices on those grounds. Of course, there also may be other grounds with some of these justices, as the media has covered ad nauseum, and rightly so, during their confirmation processes, and some new issues pertaining to Clarence Thomas, who never should have sat on that court to start with, but for Joe Biden and his Senate Judicial Committee that berated Anita Hill for daring to come forward with allegations against Clarence Thomas. He helped put Thomas on that court. Thomas, obviously a right-wing fraud. People like to defend him as an originalist and say, you might disagree with him, but he's principled. No, he's a fucking fraud. And actually, you know what? I'll go ahead and prove that to you all right now. Clarence Thomas, I wish I would have brought this up. I didn't realize I was going to talk about this, but the conversation just kind of went there, the discussion here. So Thomas, part of his actual opinion in the Dobbs decision, his written opinion in the Dobbs decision, was that the Supreme Court now needs to reconsider other cases that were found on similar 14th Amendment grounds. He even said, including, and he listed off, Griswold, Lawrence, and Obergefell. So I think most people probably know Obergefell, which basically codified the protection of it said states cannot criminalize gay marriage, right? Lawrence said states cannot criminalize sodomy, and Griswold said states cannot criminalize access to contraception, okay? So he brings up these 3 cases that the Supreme Court ruled, all of them on very similar privacy grounds, right? 14th Amendment grounds. And he says, I think the court needs to reconsider these decisions. So he's attacking women and the LGBTQ community with those statements in his written opinion during the Dobbs decision. He conveniently left one case out, though, that was also very famously, the finding was on those same 14th Amendment privacy grounds, and that is Loving v. Virginia, which protected interracial marriage. Now, why might Clarence Thomas leave that out if he's an originalist and just really believes in his interpretation of the Constitution? Clarence Thomas is a hack. He is a fraud. He is a self-interested, abusive, misogynistic clown who has absolutely no business being anywhere near power. That certainly is not to in any way excuse Gorsuch or ACB or any of the other conservative justices there. Kavanaugh is a clown in his own right? It's just to point out that I think some of the defenses of Clarence Thomas are absurd and ridiculous right on the surface, and even his confirmation process would confirm that to anybody paying the slightest modicum of attention. But anyway, that was just a little bit of a tangent. I think that this court, I think the one tiny, before we get back to the Roe v. Wade thing, I think the one tiny, and I really don't mean to minimize how absolutely terrible this is, the only tiny silver lining that I see in this string of horrendous rulings, right? Teachers can pray in schools, and all of these rulings that they're making, the Miranda rights that they cut into, and all that. The one tiny silver lining there is I think a lot of people are starting to realize what a joke the Supreme Court is. And the Supreme Court as an institution only really has authority because other institutions grant it that authority out of decorum and out of respecting the SEP that the founding fathers put together, right? What I mean by that is the Supreme Court can make a finding or a ruling, and if the executive branch simply chooses not to enforce it, then that ruling really means very little, right? There are still some really absurd laws on the books in various states, you guys. But if the cops choose not to enforce it, is it really a law? Like, there are still some states where like sex acts, like there are states where fellatio is illegal and like all these nonsensical, ridiculous things, right? You can go look up funny laws that states have. If the cops don't enforce it, it's really not a law, right? It's really not a law. So the Supreme Court only has its authority if the executive branch continues to enforce the rulings that the Supreme Court executes. So I think people starting to view the court as the clown show that it is a positive thing. There have been reports from behind the scenes that John Roberts has been concerned for the last handful of years about the way that the general public views the court. And I think it's exactly that. I think he's worried about the slippery slope of people starting to view the court as illegitimate. And again, I don't at all mean to minimize the outrageous, like the extent of the harm that will come from these rulings. This is a terrible, terrible week in terms of the actions that the Supreme Court has taken. I'm pointing out that I hope that the outrageousness of all of this will perhaps wake some people up in terms of how they view the court in general, right? Anyway, back to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. You can see here what Joe Biden's doing. Biden is nominating an anti-abortion lawyer to become a federal judge because, of course, he is. I'm not going to go into this article here, but I'm sure a number of you have seen this. And Biden, that process did happen before this ruling came out. But remember that you guys, this was leaked like a month ago. Democrats had like a month head start on this because it was leaked. And his response was to nominate an anti-abortion lawyer to the federal judiciary. Democrats, of course, have been very feckless on this in a number of different ways. They've cut deals with Mitch McConnell over and over again to stack the federal judiciary with conservative judges. It's how politics goes, you guys. Conservatives play hardball. Democrats roll over and hide behind decorum. And well, we can't go after the court because what if people started to disrespect the court or not take it seriously? What then? You know, they're just, feckless isn't even a strong enough adjective to describe the fucking Democrats. They literally do the bidding of Republicans while they're fear-mongering about and trying to fundraise off how bad Republicans are. You really honestly could not make this up for like an onion piece. You really couldn't. Also wanted to show this here. This is a tweet from Olivia Pascal. She says, "This is so embarrassing." This is a email from Nancy Pelosi. "I asked you Monday, I asked you Tuesday, I asked you Wednesday, I asked you Thursday. I'm truly sorry to ask you again today." Truly sorry to ask you again today. "But my team just informed me we failed to meet yesterday's first end of quarter deadline since the Supreme Court's ruling. I won't sugarcoat this. If I don't reach 1,387 more gifts before midnight to close the budget gap, it will be the single most devastating setback for Democrats' chances of winning this election and protecting women's reproductive freedoms nationwide. If you've been waiting for a moment to step up with $15, this is it. Can I count on you?" You know what actually might have been the single most devastating setback for Democrats' chances of winning this election? When they did fucking nothing for a year and a half. That might have been the most devastating setback for Democrats' chances of winning the election. I mean, you guys, we've gone over it ad nauseum, right? Folding to the parliamentarian on minimum wage, promising climate action, and then instead granting dozens of new drilling permits, right? I mean, just like on every fucking single issue, he promises to cancel student debt. He has the authority to cancel all of it. He's like, "I'll maybe consider canceling $10,000. I mean, it's inaction on everything. He promised a public option. Have we seen any changes to healthcare in his year and a half? Nothing. Just on issue after issue after issue after issue after issue, right? He says he'll deal with COVID. Instead, he just pretends it's over. You know, I mean, just issue after issue after issue. The dude has done nothing. That might have been where the Democrats lost their chances in November. But instead, Nancy wants you to believe that it's because you aren't giving them enough money after they rolled over to the conservatives to not only allow them to take over the Supreme Court and the federal judiciary, but to also set the stage for the election of Donald Trump, which they are now blaming for all of this. So Democrats, of course, you know, pretend they're completely innocent when they are the wolf guarding the hen house, when they are playing gatekeeper for the fascistic right-wing party that they constantly fearmonger about in order to raise funds and campaign on. It is, again, it's like you really just could not make up the extent of the deceptive, you know, nature of their messaging here following this decision. And you guys, again, I want to point out they had a month notice. This was leaked. What did they spend that month doing? They drafted fundraising emails. Are you fucking kidding me? That's it? That's it? Nothing else. I mean, you know, that really should tell you just about all that you need to know. Here's another example. This from David Sirota. He says, feel like they are just trolling everyone at this point. It's Chuck Schumer, of course. Hi, David, with a picture, a smiling picture. This is Chuck Schumer, and I have some urgent news to share with you. I just reviewed, I presume that means our end of quarter fundraising report. Oh, her, because it's her end of quarter fundraising report. And I'm shocked at how far behind Catherine Cortez Masto is on her goal. I need you to understand, if Catherine loses, Democrats lose the Senate, our last line of defense from Mitch McConnell's national abortion plan. We're going to do nothing for 40 years, and we're presently in power going to continue to do nothing, but we want your money. And we're going to frame this in a way that makes it sound like it's your fault if Democrats lose or don't meet their arbitrary funding deadlines, right? Or, you know, funding targets. So just utterly fucking ridiculous here. And, you know, I'm sure a number of you have been keeping up on this, but it's just really utterly ridiculous. I tweeted this out earlier, but when Andrew Jackson was upset with this, not exactly a sympathetic figure, right? One of the worst presidents of all time, Trail of Tears, all that. And actually this ruling had something to do with that. When he was essentially told by the Supreme Court, you cannot continue to impede further on Cherokee lands. You know what Andrew Jackson said? This is what conservatives do. They actually fight. Andrew Jackson said that, effectively, I'm paraphrasing, the court has made its finding. Now let's see it enforce it. Again, that concept I was talking about earlier. If other institutions aren't enforcing the rulings of the Supreme Court, they don't really fucking matter, do they? So Jackson basically said, you can go fucking pound sand. I'm going to do what I want. And he went on and most know the story from there, right? Massacred a whole bunch of indigenous communities. So when conservatives want to do something awful like that, they disregard the Supreme Court, right? When George Bush wants to pass his tax cuts, he fires the parliamentarian and replaces him with someone who will agree with his interpretation of Senate rules. You know, what do Democrats do? They cower, and then they hide behind decorum. And they think that that's going to play with their voters. Of course it's not. Of course, far more importantly, what it means is that the Supreme Court can inflict violence upon, you know, women and the LGBTQ community, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because Democrats, who are supposed to be the party that is somewhat of a line of defense for the most vulnerable and marginalized people in our society, instead cower and fold and grovel to the Republican Party and say, Mitch, can we cut you a deal? I'll put another anti-abortion judge on the federal judiciary for you. Can we please make a deal? Even though we're in power, can I grovel to you and can we make a deal? It is so fucking pathetic. I keep saying feckless. Again, it's just not a strong enough adjective. These Democrats are not your friend. They are the gatekeeper for the fascists. They are more upset with leftists than they are with Republicans and fascists. They have demonstrated this time and again. And in fact, the next story we're going to get to here is a nice little slice of that, right? I'm sure a number of you have followed this. The Green Party candidate Matthew Hoh has been effectively removed from the ballot by the Democrats in North Carolina. He tweets out here, watch the moment from the meeting where Chairman Sir Costa, a Democrat, refuses to answer North Carolina Green Party lawyer Oliver Hall's question if there's any reason not to certify the North Carolina's 15,953 Green Party, that is, verified signatures to put Ho on the ballot, then shouts down our lawyer and mutes him. And I have this clip for you guys. Give me just 1 second. If you have not seen this, it is really quite remarkable. We will watch this short clip, come back and discuss.
I would like to, and I'm hopeful that we can get to the bottom of this. And it would be my desire, personal desire, to see this new party on the ballot. But given what's in front of us today, I can't in good conscience vote to certify today. So I would like to wait, give our staff enough time to go through this process. If there's a motion to vote on this today, I will be voting no.
Mr. Chairman, may I be recognized?
Yeah, Mr. Hall, let's make it brief though, please.
Well, thank you. Is there any question as to the validity of the 15,953 signatures that have been validated by state county boards of elections?
Mr. Hall, I don't want to get into the details of a criminal investigation, but I have questions sufficient in number to be not willing to vote for certification today.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I asked the question because the board is effectively presuming that there is some question as to the validity of those signatures by delaying the certification and possibly rejecting the certification of the Green Party petitions. And if there is some presumption here that is operative, the presumption ought to be that validated signatures are valid, unless there is some basis for considering them invalid or at least subject to further investigation. So again, the question is there any basis for considering or questioning the validity of any one of those 15,953 validated signatures?
And I will thank you for your comments to the board. I will stand by my earlier assertion, and I will ask any other board members if they have questions.
Mr. Chairman, you have not answered the question. You are now
Mr.
voting.
Hall, you're out of order, sir. Go ahead and mute Mr. Hall, please. I'll ask the board members if they have any other questions for staff.
Pretty remarkable, isn't it? How bold they are. I think one little benefit of these meetings now being virtual is that we can simply record them and post them on social media, right? How often would you have seen that 20 years ago? But really remarkable how bold they are in their restriction of third-party ballot access. This, the party, by the way, that righteously, in many cases, condemns Republicans for what? For restricting access to votes or to the ability to vote. Now they turn around and they tell the Green Party, you don't get to be on the ballot. So again, both in principle and in strategy, I think this is remarkably stupid. Of course, on the surface, you understand like why a purely greedy party would do this. They don't want their votes cut into. But listen, how many listen, you guys, at this point, how many people that are voting green are still remotely sympathetic to the Democratic Party? Especially now that they've watched them do nothing but try to raise money on the Dobbs decision. How many people are still actually sympathetic enough with this fucking party to say, oh, you kicked Matthew Ho off the ballot, I'll vote for the Democrat? I just don't think there's a very large number of people that were supporting Matthew Ho that will turn around and vote for the Democrats. In fact, you may have just martyred the guy and made them more insistent in their opposition to the Democratic Party. So again, both in principle and in strategy and practice, I think it's a ridiculously stupid thing for them to do. I'm glad that this video got leaked. And, you know, again, the one, again, tiny silver lining is they might be making Matthew Ho into somewhat of a household name, at least in circles on the left. So you might accidentally be elevating the guy with your outrageous anti-democratic behavior. But, you know, again, it's not surprising because I follow politics closely enough to know this, and I'm sure most of my audience does too, where it's like you're not shocked by this behavior anymore at all, because they've done this a few elections in a row now, at least against the Green Party in various states. And they've, gutted ranked choice voting in Maine and New York, and I think elsewhere too. So you're not like surprised that the Democrats would do this, because best predictor of the future is past. So you're like, this is the behavior they engage in. But there's something still like morally shocking about how bold and upfront they're willing to be about it, while they pivot around and say, Republicans are trying to kill the democracy. Our democracy's at stake, which is why we're kicking candidates off the fucking ballot. It's just, I guess it's not so much that I'm shocked by their behavior. I guess I'm shocked that we live in a society where that behavior is remotely acceptable, or at least like doesn't ruffle very many feathers. You know what I mean? Anyway, I thought that story was worth covering, and it once again belies the Democrats' claims on voting issues, voting access, democracy, etc. Right? The very name of the fucking party, as many people have pointed out on many occasions. So we have a devastating story here. I apologize, you guys. This article is wanting to bring ads up. Akron police video shows Jayland Walker being shot up to 60 times. 60 times. Oh, this was an article. Here we go. As Akron, Ohio police released body camera footage Sunday of the fatal shooting of black motorist Jayland Walker, showing multiple police officers discharging a hail of bullets. Policing experts say the video produces more questions than answers early on. Officers shot and killed Walker, who was 25, on Monday as he fled police who were pursuing him. That's it right there, right? That's all we need. Oh, I'm sorry, you guys. I thought I had this up on the screen. I am exhausted. I've not a good stream so far. And I bring the wrong thing up. This is just going great. Here we go. Okay. It's a USA Today article. I apologize for that. But they say here, officers shot and killed Walker on Monday as he fled police. It is not a crime. Well, okay, it might be a crime. It is not a death sentence to flee police. In order to kill somebody legally, you have to believe that that person is a threat to your life. That applies to cops too. Well, it's supposed to, right? It's supposed to. You can't just say he was running away from me, so I shot him 60 fucking times. Can you imagine if you or I did that, let alone if you or I did that to a cop? Can you imagine how USA Today would be presenting it? It wouldn't be like, man shot by police, further investigation, ongoing. That's how they're always so sterile in how they frame this stuff, because most of these papers, most of the time, engage in propaganda. Fled police and got shot 60 times for it. Just absolutely insane. Pursuing him for a traffic violation and an equipment violation. A traffic violation. I just, at some point it's I run out of things to say. Again, it's one of those hardly surprising but morally shocking and stunning every time that it happens. Video showed officers unsuccessfully attempting to stop Walker using tasers as he fled his car before discharging a flurry of rounds, killing him. Gee, if someone's running away from you and you start tasing him, do you think that's going to make him stop running away? The footage released by police Sunday includes a narrated video of the events leading up to the shooting, as well as body camera footage of police pursuit of Walker and the fatal gunfire. Walker's body was blurred in the video at the request of his family, according to police. At a news conference Sunday, Police Chief Stephen Milet said the medical examiner determined about 60 wounds on Walker's body. It was not yet clear how many shots were fired by the 8 officers who were involved in the shooting. Think about that, though, you guys. They probably didn't hit every time, right? What does 60 shots in his body mean? Did they shoot 80, 90, 100 times? Walker was pronounced dead at the scene, and his death from multiple gunshot wounds was ruled a homicide, according to the medical examiner. No shit. Like, they have to throw that in, right? No, it was natural causes. USA Today spoke to 2 criminal justice and policing experts who say the videos on their own ultimately do not provide full clarity on key moments in the shooting. Of course. Including what led officers to switch from taser use to deadly force and what led to the volume of gunfire. I can't even read this, you guys. I mean, I picked this article because of how it frames this murder, but look at that. Look at that. They're leaving the door open to the possibility that shooting a man 60 times who was running away from you was somehow justified. How can you look yourself in the mirror and call yourself a journalist and write that drivel? That's offensive. I don't use that word very often. That is fucking offensive. That should offend the sensibilities of any decent journalist and any decent human being on the planet. Shame on USA Today. And actually, I want to call him out by name. Who wrote this fucking piece of shit? This is by Katie Stanton. Shame on you, Katie Stanton, for engaging in rank propaganda. Leaving the door open for, oh, maybe those 60 shots in his back were justified. Again, I want you to ask yourself, what if a civilian chased and shot a cop 60 times, or a group of civilians chased and shot a cop 60 times while the cop was running from him? How would that be worded in USA Today by Katie Stanton? We must, as I say every time I talk about this shit, defund and abolish police. They're ineffective at solving and preventing violent crime. They engage in theft all the time. They call it asset forfeiture, but it's theft. In fact, in recent years, they have crossed the line so that they are now stealing more from people than burglars do with their asset forfeiture. You can go ahead and look that up. Again, I would have brought that up on the screen if I'd have thought I was going to mention it. They steal more than the burglars they are supposedly there to apprehend do. They commit violence constantly against not just the black community, but the indigenous community and protesters and the impoverished community and on and on. Their job, essentially, is to criminalize poverty in many, many ways, right? They enforce evictions. They go after homeless people, etc. This institution is one that we're going to keep around. Why? Why? You can't even say that they're good at their fucking job. What portion of rapists go to jail, you guys? Isn't it like 1 or 2%? What portion of rapes are solved? What portion of murders are solved? Go look at the numbers. When you throw more cops into a community, that community does not become safer. It doesn't. The communities with the most cops are the least safe communities. You know what makes a community more safe? Housing reform. A federal jobs guarantee would do wonders to making communities more safe by lifting the floor on the currently impoverished people, right? Medicare for all would do wonders for the crime rate. Education reform and robust funding of education, right? Mental health services and rehab services, robust, publicly funded, free at the point of service. All of this would actually cut into crime and uplift society, improve society. Cops don't do that. They're not even good at the one thing they constantly fearmonger about. Just look at the Uvalde shooting, you guys. So we need to defund and abolish police and start from scratch and build an institution that is not a bunch of armed, quite frankly, many fascist, raging maniacs who were born as an institution out of slave catchers. I think we can do a little better than that when it comes to public safety and enforcing public safety. We need to defund, abolish police, start from scratch. I hope there is justice for Jayland Walker. I will hold my breath on that because, I didn't think there could be a much more egregious case than Breonna Taylor, for example, or many others. There are too many names at this point for me to have ready to pop out at the top of my head, but Breonna Taylor was certainly, in my view, about as egregious as a shooting can get. How do you claim self-defense when you break into somebody's fucking apartment? Those cops got to walk free, right? They weren't even, a grand jury refused to indict them. Of course, that's in part because Daniel can't, well, it's a whole long fucking story. Mitch McConnell's protege was in charge of the prosecution of those officers to the grand jury. It's a whole story. But the point is, these institutions defend cops. Even when they murder people in the most brazen, blatant, outrageous, in-your-face kinds of ways. Like this. 60 shots for running away. 60 shots for running away. I hope these cops are charged and brought to justice, but we need to fix this institution. That's the wrong word. We need to dismantle this institution and rebuild an institution that's actually there to serve us, serve the people, serve society, and look out for public welfare. Because that's not at all what cops do. Not at all. Not even a tiny bit. One more devastating story here. This one about the climate crisis. This is in Common Dreams. Tipping point of no return feared as Amazon rainforest fires surge. Up to now, the Biden administration has only legitimized the Brazilian government's anti-indigenous and anti-environmental agenda, said Greenpeace USA. This by Jake Johnson. The Brazilian government published data Friday showing that more than 2,500 fire hotspots were recorded in the Amazon rainforest last month, the highest number for June since 2007, one of the worst years ever for the critical ecosystem. The latest report from Brazil's National Institute for Space Research estimates that the Brazilian Amazon has lost 1,450 square miles of jungle since the start of 2022. Greenpeace Brazil said in response to the alarming figures that the far-right Bolsonaro government's systemic rampage against basic environmental protections is responsible for the surge in rainforest fires and overall deforestation, which have helped transform parts of the Amazon, long known as a key carbon sink, into sources of planet-warming greenhouse gas. Quote, agribusiness is hitting new records for forest destruction as the dry season arrives in the Amazon, said Cristiane Mazzetti, a spokesperson for Greenpeace Brazil. Illegal burnings and deforestation have accelerated over the last 3 years as a direct result of the Brazilian government's anti-environmental agenda that encourages the destruction of the forest. If this trend does not change, Mazzetti added, we will approach the tipping point of no return in which the Amazon could fail as a rainforest. Brazilian academics have warned in recent months that a Bolsonaro victory in the October presidential election would mean total demise for the Brazilian Amazon. Recent polling shows that Bolsonaro is trailing leftist former President Luiz da Silva, who has vowed to pursue net zero deforestation if elected. That's Lula, of course, and early polling that I saw, you guys, was not even close. It was Lula out in front by quite a margin, but you never know how that may change as October approaches. But one can hope, right? If Bolsonaro remains in power, in the power of presidency, it's hopeless in terms of the environment. Marcio Astrini, executive secretary of the Sao Paulo-based Climate Observatory, told HuffPost in April, a record-shattering month for Amazon deforestation. Quote, there will be more deforestation, said Astrini. The Amazon will fast forward to its collapse point. So I always note when we talk about climate that it seems like we're constantly like in a worse situation than we last thought, passing more points of no return. And here we are once again. So shout out to Common Dreams, who, one of the few outlets that I think covers this stuff with any level of consistency. This really should be the biggest fucking story out there on a consistent basis. Obviously, Don't Look Up sort of satirize that concept and how the media looks the other way when it comes to these existential threats, because the solution to said threat would mean cutting into a lot of the industries, the profits of a lot of the industries that own and buy off the media. So it's once again sort of obvious, blatant corruption that is in many ways holding us back from dealing with this problem. But again, shout out to Common Dreams for being one of the exceptions to that rule and consistently covering climate issues. And I encourage everybody out there to take the climate crisis seriously. I don't know what to say at this point, you guys. It's like it, if we don't do anything, we're not going to have a habitable fucking planet. What more do you need to hear? We have a thread here. This is from Alec Karakatsanis. This is a short one. I like to show Alec's threads. If you're not familiar with him, go give him a follow at Equality Alec. Fantastic follow on Twitter. He's constantly breaking down how the media engages in propaganda. And this is actually a thread where he's suggesting questions that media should ask of police departments instead of the kind of nonsense that they sort of, where they regurgitate the talking points of police. These are the questions that should be asked of police chiefs and mayors and spokespeople for police departments. He says it would be interesting for any journalist or city council member in any city to ask the following questions to any police chief in any city. Why do you choose not to arrest bosses for wage theft, but you choose to arrest poor people for shoplifting? That's a very good question. Who are the top 10 highest paid cops in the city, including overtime? Do you think this overtime pay is a good use of taxpayer money? We talked earlier about the framing, not saying taxpayer money. This is an instance where it actually does apply. He's talking about city budgets, not federal budgets. So just to give that quick caveat. But this would be very interesting. And I also want to point out something that Alec has pointed out a lot before. That is, you would be stunned how many PR people are employed by especially large police departments, right? And how much money these departments spend on narrative control and ensuring that their budget is never threatened by left activists who want to defund them. Which surveillance technology are you employing that has not been publicly disclosed to the city council? Once again, a wonderful question that almost nobody would ever even think to ask of a police chief. Why do you choose to arrest people for drug possession as the plurality of your arrests? Very good question. Very good question. They also don't seem to give two shits about the companies that profiteer off of the addiction crisis and the opioid epidemic. They instead go after the victims of that epidemic. Another excellent question there from Alec. Why do you choose not to investigate and arrest people who own polluting businesses for illegal dumping of chemicals in violation of state law? Once again, a great question. And if I could add to that one, why do you often, this might be particular to location, but why do you choose to, brutalize and arrest protesters of companies that engage in the illegal dumping and destruction of the planet? If state law criminalizes abortion and then criminalizes contraception and then criminalizes sodomy, do you intend to have your officers cage people for that? Once again, wonderful question. We could add, of course, to that if the Supreme Court decided to overturn a Obergefell or, any of the other, Loving, the one that we talked about earlier. Would you choose to enforce that? Of course, that would put any police chief on the spot. There are many other questions that should be asked of cops that never will be. Instead, the media plays stenographer for these departments. And that is part of the reason that we have such a cartoonish view of police in this country on the by and large. I also think cop dramas, you guys, I know I've talked about this before, but I think cop dramas are like just one of the most harmful forms of entertainment that our society has to offer, where, they go out of their way to show you what great people these detectives are. And, the ones that get me are when there's a plot line where the cops are violating policy or maybe even the law, but they're good guys, so you let it slide. I mean, think about the mentality that pounds into people's heads, right? Yeah, this reporter might be saying a cop did something wrong, but it's a cop. Shouldn't we trust him? And again, I think Uvalde is going to be a turning point in public perception of police, because the fallback when we criticize them for the misconduct and the brutalization of, in particular, racial minorities and how they treat protests and how many murders they have compared to other countries. When we criticize them for this kind of stuff, the deflection is always, well, what are you going to do about violent crime, huh? Who are you going to call when someone pulls a knife on you, huh? It's always these like ridiculous absolutist questions that are designed to deflect and make you think that the cops are necessary. And again, I want to point out, they're not good at preventing or solving violent crime. In fact, they're quite bad at it. They're a waste of resources if your goal is actually to go after violent crime. Alec had cited a number before that most departments are in the 3 to 4% range in terms of what resources they allocate to violent crime. They pretty openly do not give a flying fuck about violent crime. And again, I'll say, go check what's the rate of murders that they solve. What's the rate of rapes that they solve? When it comes to actual violent crime, they are terrible at preventing and solving them. So even the deflection that most people tend to go to that comes from the sort of the cop dramas and all that kind of propaganda that we get through pop culture, and the more direct and insidious propaganda that Alec often talks about coming from the legacy media outlets, most often the New York Times, but also the LA Times, and is it the San Francisco Chronicle or whatever the name of the paper out in San Francisco is that keeps publishing a bunch of nonsensical drivel about the recall of Sasha Boudin, and all these papers, major papers all across the fucking country engage in this stuff. So That mentality is pounded into our heads. And I think, again, it's one of the most nefarious forms of entertainment that we have to offer. Great thread from Alec, and I encourage anybody who's in a position to ask a police chief a question to ask them one of those. Hey, why do you go after poor people for theft, but you don't go after bosses for wage theft? Hey, why don't you go after giant chemical corporations for illegal dumping that very plainly violate state and or federal laws? Why don't you go after them? You know, they'll have no answer for that. Why do you engage in so much asset forfeiture that you're taking more shit than burglars are? They won't have an answer for that. You know, I'd also love to be able to ask the Uvalde cops a question or two. And again, I'm hopeful that that particular instance, as tragic and horrible as it was, will present a turning point in terms of the public perception of police and the role that they play in our society. So I want to talk a little bit about this piece in the New York Times and the anti-trans rhetoric that's been going around lately a little more broadly. This is a tweet from Alan McLeod, another excellent follow on Twitter if you guys aren't following him, at Alan R. McLeod. He's Mint Press News, by the way. He often posts about foreign policy, but he also has posted a lot of media criticism and things of that like. Great follow on Twitter. This is truly the dumbest thing that the New York Times has published in hours. I love that line. In hours. Far right and far left agree on one thing: women don't count. He goes on to say the article's premise, don't bother reading it, is the far right have taken away women's bodily autonomy, yes, but the far left say trans women are women, so they're as bad as each other. Oh gosh, you guys, I've been all over the map today. I meant to be showing you this. You can see here the New York Times piece. The far right and far left agree on one thing: women don't count. And there's Alan's breakdown that I just read to you verbatim. This notion that supporting trans rights is somehow anti-woman is one of the most absurd notions that I have ever heard on the surface. And that's why they have to jump to these very specific things to try to frame the argument in a way that would not make any sense at all if they weren't jumping to these specific things. So they'll go to school sports and they'll say, well, you don't want someone way stronger and bigger beating up on someone else. It's like, yeah, nobody wants that. That's why we have weight classes in boxing, right? No one wants to see someone getting pummeled by someone 100 pounds bigger than them. No one wants to see that. So they take advantage of that sympathy that people have, and they disingenuously plug in their cultural, nonsensical, incoherent anti-trans bigotry as though that is the natural conclusion of not wanting to see someone get beat up. Because if they just came out and said what they really think on the surface, it wouldn't land so well, right? So they have to go to these very specific things and misframe it all in order to make their incoherence seem coherent. So this is another one of those, right? Oh, if you support trans rights, you don't support women. Again, it's just absurd on the surface, and the New York Times ought to be ashamed of themselves. That's by Pamela Paul. Shame on you, Pamela Paul. It also does this thing that major media outlets have done as long as I've been paying attention to politics, where they equate far left with far right, as though fascist white nationalists are somehow tantamount to people who want fucking healthcare and education and better treatment of workers. As though those two things are equally extreme. So it's a false sort of, comparison that a lot of these outlets like to make, and the New York Times does it here in a very incoherent way. And it plays right into a lot of the anti-trans bigotry that has been spewed from right-wing politicians and pop culture and right-wing media outlets in increasing numbers, I would say, over the last maybe year or so. I don't want to minimize that that's been prevalent for a long time, but it seems like there's been a very intentional push on the right to start pushing these absurd narratives about drag shows, or implying that all members of the LGBTQ community are somehow grooming children. We're going to get into that one in a little bit too, but like these absurd, totally baseless, totally incoherent notions that are obviously homophobic and anti-LGBTQ on the surface. And, you know, I think they know that there's electoral value in that for them. I think they're trying to rally up their base and a number of reasons that the timing is now, but it's very harmful and dangerous for the LGBTQ community. Obviously, talks of like registries and things like that, they're trying to frame the community as child abusers, which again, completely baseless. They can't like point to any facts or evidence that back that up. Of course they can't. But they think if they just attack it in this in pop culture settings and in the media as much as possible, that it will somehow start to land. I just want to show some examples of the hypocrisy, you guys. And I know that some of this is anecdotal, but I just want to show you how it really is the religious right that is actually grooming children on a regular basis. And engaging in narratives that dehumanize children and sexualize children. That's happening on the right on a very regular basis. So we're just going to take a couple looks at examples here. Again, you guys, I know this is anecdotal, but I wanted to show you guys this. Steven Crowder tweets out best Halloween costume, or actually first I'll read the initial one. He says, the left has made it clear that they are targeting your kids. They must be protected from the filth, immorality, and propaganda they're being taught to accept no more. What revolting, repulsive language Stephen engages in there. Hardly surprising from that clown. The Serfs retweet this with a screenshot of a poll that Stephen had previously put up, where he asks, best Halloween costume, slutty Trump, slutty Greta Thunberg, slutty AOC, or slutty Gerald Morgan Jr. So who's really sexualizing children? Who's really constantly engaging in this disgusting practice, right? Again, a few anecdotal examples here. New York Post says glamorous heir. This is going to be particular people, how they respond to one article and how they respond to another, and you'll kind of see the pattern. Glamorous heiress 45 charged with having sex with 14-year-old boy 4 times in one day. That's a New York Post clickbait article, obviously. This guy says, did the boy complain? So his take on a 14-year-old boy being raped by a 45-year-old is, well, he didn't complain, right? He probably liked it. That's his take there. But to a tweet that says, White House invites a gay high school graduate to speak who praises his openly gay 5th grade teacher for providing him support he needed to understand his identity in grade school. This guy says groomer. Okay, you see the trend we're about to establish? Once again, response to that same New York Post piece. I would have hit that at 14 from BT Hamilton. So we're going to minimize this instance of actual grooming and sexualizing a child and statutory rape. That's good. He's saying I would have done it too. And then a series of accusations where BT is saying groomer to undoubtedly posts about the LGBTQ community. Another one here. This one, Josh. I know it's wrong, but I also remember being 14. Kids today don't know how good they have it. So he's saying this kid has it good because a 45-year-old statutorily, is that even a word, statutorily? A 45-year-old committed statutory rape against this 14-year-old. He's like, oh, lucky 14-year-old. That's his response there. When PolitiFact tweets out, in the wake of Florida's Don't Say Gay law, the term grooming has been used to imply people who discuss LGBTQ topics are deliberately preying on children. That's not what grooming is. He says groomer sympathizers. Not a good look. So again, he's applauding a 14-year-old for being raped, but he thinks that the LGBTQ community is engaging in grooming. Average Joe says, where were these women when I was 14? With a laughing emoji. And then Average Joe retweets Matt Walsh, total clown show if you don't know Matt, who says, why do men need to cross-dress around kids at all? What is the scenario where you'd prefer to have a man dressed as a woman instead of just an actual woman reading to kids? Can you explain? Well, it's fascinating that Matt's the one attempting to distinguish a difference there, when these people also will tell you that their political ideology is rooted in freedom and liberty, right? But don't you wear women's clothes around my kids? Again, the hypocrisies are endless. They just never fucking stop. And they say many of these folks. No, I saw another thread with similar examples. So I know this is anecdotal, but I thought that was worth bringing to you all. And it just goes to point out some of the rank hypocrisy on the right when it comes to these narratives. And one other thing that I just wanted to get into, if there's one institution that is engaged in more grooming than any other, I would say it's probably the Catholic Church, right? Systemically raping children and essentially implying to those kids that that's God's will, that that's what God wants you to do, that you're doing a good thing by allowing a Catholic priest to touch or rape you. How can people who are crying about groomers miss that target? Again, it just goes to point out the rank hypocrisy from the far right on these issues. A kid is in far more danger at a Catholic church than that kid is in danger at a drag show. I think every sensible person recognizes that, right? Another hypocrisy, just while we're on the church very quickly, Catholics are pro-life, right? They're pro-life. I tweeted this out the other day for those that didn't see it. They're pro-life if you simply choose to ignore the Inquisition and the Crusades and their endorsement of Hitler's final solution, and they're aiding his rise to power. Same, by the way, with Antonio Salazar and Mussolini, and there were Catholic fascist parties in the East Balkans. You cannot tell the story of fascism without including the papacy. But they're pro-life. They're pro-life. They endorsed the African slave trade. They supported the Rwandan genocide. At the height of the AIDS epidemic, they condemned the use of condoms. And we could circle back to the systemic rape and molestation of children thing. What about this is pro-life? What about this is pro-life? And by the way, you guys, and I've said this before too, but if there is one thing, if you want to pull a society out of poverty, there's one thing you must do. There are many things you can do that will be helpful, but there's one thing you absolutely must do if you want to pull a society out of poverty, as the Catholic Church very much likes to claim it is intending to do. That is empower women specifically over their reproductive choices. What has the Catholic Church stood on the front lines against for its entire existence? The right to choose. So massive hypocrites. Nothing about that party is pro-life. Was it pro-life to kill Galileo for being right, you guys? Or to kill Jan Hus for being a Protestant? Or to kill countless people for, homosexual acts or heresy or blasphemy or whatever they wanted to come up with? Was that pro-life? Burning people alive for disagreeing with your religion or for engaging in homosexual behavior? That's pro-life? I mean, again, it's just, I could go on and on and on, but you get the point. They're just massive fucking hypocrites on this stuff. And if anyone wants to target those who are grooming children in our society, you may want to start with the papacy, with the Catholic Church. Be a good place to start. So this push of anti-trans rhetoric, combined with the recent Supreme Court decisions, which have the potential to gut Obergefell and Lawrence, among other cases as well, I find to be terrifying for the LGBTQ community, and I encourage you all to stand with your LGBTQ comrades and make sure that they know that you have their back and that they don't live in a society that is completely full of these right-wing, deranged, dangerous maniacs who have a very loud voice when it comes to these issues. And again, I want to debunk every single element of that grooming rhetoric. It is incoherent and baseless on the surface. And you should not believe one iota of what the conservatives are saying about the LGBTQ community. So we will keep up with any developments in the laws of various states and things of that nature that are designed to attack the trans community. But I just want to encourage my audience to stand with your LGBTQ comrades as much as you possibly can. So I'm sure a number of you have heard about this, the airline situation, right? Airlines, at the first opportunity, they were given a large subsidy during COVID to essentially keep their pilots and flight attendants and people that work in baggage and every element of the airline employed, even though there weren't going to be many flights booked during the height of COVID before we had vaccines and things, right? So basically, the federal government says, we'll give you money right now because you're going to lose money. And that what you have to do is keep those people employed and keep them on the payroll so that they don't lose their income. And when things pick back up, you still have the infrastructure to run flights. Okay, that was the basic agreement. That stimulus, that agreement had an end date. I want to say it was in September of 21. I may have that wrong. Someone can go ahead and put in the comments if they know that date. I think it was September of 21. The date came and went where airlines could fire employees or lay off employees without violating the agreement they had made to take on federal subsidies. Okay. Many of them, including the big ones, Delta, American, United, Southwest, etc., immediately laid off large portions of their employees. I've seen the figure 25% thrown around. I don't know if that was about a particular airline or the industry as a whole, but they laid off a humongous portion of their employees the moment that they were able to, while still taking in all of the federal subsidies. And then when flight booking started to pick back up, they complained of low staffing and, oh, we can't fill out all of our flights. Well, the latest, as I'm sure, again, a number of you have followed, is that airlines were booking flights knowing that they did not have the labor to facilitate those flights. So they're taking money from customers who are now planning their travels around thinking that they have that flight booked, and knowing that, at least in a vague sense, a lot of those flights are going to get canceled. They might not have known exactly which flight on which day was going to get canceled, but they knew they were booking way more flights than they could actually manage. So they knew a lot of their customers were going to have their flights canceled. And I'm sure a number of you have followed the response from Pete Buttigieg. I always butcher his name so bad. I'm just going to call him Mayor Pete because that's a lot easier to say. And I think it's kind of demeaning in a very hilarious way. And anyway, this is a tweet from Matt Stoller retweeting Mayor Pete, who says, if you've been waiting and saving for a vacation, you're counting on getting the service you paid for. We are engaging the airlines every day on the steps they must take to deliver this summer travel season. Matt retweets this and says, engaging with the airlines every day. You do know you regulate the airlines, right? They aren't your friends or clients. I responded rather similarly to that. I said that this is the Dems version of regulation, is engaging with those they're supposed to regulate. Once again, you guys, the wolf is guarding the hen house. What's even more astounding, I think, though, is how tone deaf they are and how in a bubble they are. That Pete thinks he can just tweet that out and get, what did he think, applauded for it? Did he think people would be like, oh, tough guys engaging with the airlines? I mean, did he think people who had their flights canceled were going to applaud him for that? No. A number of politicians, including Bernie, have suggested massive fines for the airlines for canceled flights of this nature, as well as immediate refunds within a couple of hours, kind of refunds from the airlines for the cost of the tickets. It's hardly surprising. The airlines are actually one of the most rapacious and greedy industries out there. Much of their business involves, in one way or another, law, right? So they have very successfully bought off legislatures to create a beneficial environment for them in every way, shape, and form. And you know, we have let them, again, the wolf is guarding the henhouse. So that's why they get away with this. And they know that even if the government is going to do anything, if the regulators are going to do anything, first they're going to send out a tweet like this, right? Just so you know, we're engaging. You know, they know any action will be inadequate against them. They know that the modern Democratic Party is not at all serious about coming down on corporations. You know, it's quite sad. I mean, there's a lot to criticize about people like FDR or Johnson, but can you imagine how those presidents would have responded to to companies just brazenly flaunting that they're violating the law and defrauding customers? And you know, I mean, it's so pathetic. Biden put out a tweet too about fossil fuels where he basically said, "Cut it out, drop your prices, cut it out." Right? Instead of a windfall profit tax, which would actually force them to cut it out, he just says, now. You know, that's the Democrats' version of hardball, is pleading on Twitter with the industries that they're supposed to fucking regulate and are empowered to regulate. They instead go plead on Twitter, begging those companies, please be nicer to your customers and workers, please. That is what you get when you put Democrats in power. Okie doke. So I wanted to show you guys, this is another tweet from Alan McLeod. This isn't so much a story as it's just kind of worth bringing up for a couple of reasons. Alan says, love to defend myself by flying nuclear bombers over Iran, with an upside down smiley face. As you can see, it's a Politico piece that is titled U.S. Bomber Mission over Persian Gulf Aimed at Cautioning Iran. In announcing Wednesday's bomber flight, the head of U.S. Central Command said it was a defensive move. Okay, guys, can you imagine, like, how would the United States take it if Iran or Russia or China or fill in the blank decided they were going to fly a bomber just off our coast? And then that administration in whatever country came out and said, yeah, that was a defensive move. Yeah, that was a defensive move. We just flew a nuclear bomber right up next to your territory. That was defensive. It was defensive. Utterly ridiculous, but that is how things are framed in the Western press. And Alan, again, at Alan R. McLeod, go give him a follow. He's wonderful at pointing out the incoherence and deranged nature of the modern Western press when it comes to covering these issues. I also just, part of the reason I wanted to bring this up is because today is the anniversary of, I don't remember which year in the 80s it was off the top of my head, but the year when I want to say 88 or was it 87, one of those, where the United States shot down an Iranian passenger flight and killed over 200 people, and has still not apologized for that. They claim that it was a miscommunication. They claim that there's you can squawk either military or civilian, and they claim that this jet was squawking as though it was a military aircraft and that they tried to contact it a number of times and never got a response from the pilot, so they shot it down. So they try to claim it was a misunderstanding. They killed 200 plus civilians shooting down a jetliner and have yet to apologize for it. Whether you believe it was incompetence or malicious intent, the cynic in me leans towards the latter. I think it was probably an attempt to provoke a response from Iran that they could then use as justification for a hot war with Iran. But that's the cynic in me. Whether you think it was, the point is, whether you think it was intentional or incompetent, the United States should certainly apologize for it and acknowledge it. And they have yet to. We have really been on the wrong side of interactions with Iran at every step. But of course, the United States will use any sort of aggressive statement in response to our aggression to justify further aggression, right? It's that convenient start the story wherever you see most fit. So it looks like Iran is the aggressor, right? And of course, the JCPOA appears is falling into shambles, those negotiations. So once again, relations with Iran seem to be falling apart. But, it just remarkable that was what, 25 years ago? No more, 30 years ago, 30 plus years ago. Math's a little off, 35 almost years ago. and the relations with Iran are still what they are today. So good find there from Alan, pointing out Politico's absolutely unhinged coverage, flying a nuclear bomber over the Persian Gulf a defensive move. And I wanted to close on, again, it's not so much a story, you guys, but yesterday, I believe it was, no, today, is Julian Assange's 51st birthday. If I remember correctly, it is the fourth, yeah, they say here, the fourth birthday that he has spent in a UK jail. Of course, the efforts to extradite him are ongoing and are not looking so great for Julian. This, again, a fight for press freedom and a fight for the capacity to blow the whistle. And it's even more than that. It's a fight for journalists to be able to publish materials from whistleblowers. If you think Julian Assange should be in any trouble whatsoever, you do not believe in a remotely free press. Period. Full stop. Julian Assange is a hero, and, you know, as is Edward Snowden, as there are a number of these heroes that we have chosen instead to prosecute, demonize, and frame as traitors to the country. Can you imagine if that's how we treated Daniel Ellsberg, or Bob Woodward, or, I mean, can you imagine if that's how we treated big whistleblowers and journalists from the past? So happy birthday to Julian Assange. And I encourage my audience to, in any way, shape, or form that you possibly can, support Julian Assange. I don't know that there's a particularly viable avenue by which he could be freed at this point. I don't know where to tell you to direct your efforts, but, you know, to quote that movie Network, you know, first you got to be mad. I might not know where to direct you, but you got to be angry and outraged about it before anything will happen. And I hope that the outrage for Julian's mistreatment does not wane as time goes on. And I know you guys, some of these issues, it's like I think it's what happened with COVID in many ways. We get fatigued. It's only human. I don't even blame like individual people for it happening. These devastating stories, climate change, COVID, police violence, right? The ongoing situation with Julian. All these kinds of stories fatigue us over time. I really do get it. It's not fun to have to read. We only get so many years on this planet, and spending 2 or 3 of them trying to sort through what is a shit story with a shit ending, it gets tiresome. I really do understand, but I want to encourage everybody to keep their outrage up about these you know, issues that are of massive importance. When it comes to protecting the principle of a free press and free speech, when it comes to protecting, for example, women's rights, when it comes to protecting, you know, the Black and Indigenous communities' rights to not be brutalized and killed by police. I mean, these are existential issues, you guys. Climate crisis, existential issues. I encourage you not to lose your outrage. Stay mad, and hopefully we can all put together some avenues by which we can actually affect some change on this. With that, I will call it a show. I apologize. It was a little shorter than usual, you guys, as I've alluded to a number of times. My work schedule has been a little bit hectic. I've just started a new job, and I'm not on a set schedule, at least not yet. So I apologize for the lack of content lately. I've also been out of town a lot. I have a whole lot going on in my life right now. I very much look forward to being back with you all every Sunday. I'm going to try to start putting some content out during the week. We also always, huge shout out to my colleagues who at RP who are putting clips together throughout the week and cutting up these shows so that you all can have a shorter bit if you would like to digest the content in that way. But make sure you're not missing out on any of our content. If you are not subscribed, please subscribe to the Real Progress in Action YouTube channel. Also buzz over to the Real Progressives YouTube channel and subscribe there. Please like this video. Please comment to help us combat the algorithm. Share this on social media. Share it with your family, friends, colleagues, neighbors, loved ones, etc. Any comrades you might have in your life. Word of mouth does wonders. Anything you can do to help elevate our content, not just mine, but the Macro and Cheese podcast with our founder and CEO, Steve Grumbine. He's also doing the Rogue Scholar throughout the week on this YouTube channel. Make sure to elevate that content. The Up and Up with Jody Newell, that's focused on activism. Make sure you're elevating all of our content. Go to realprogressives.org for all of our articles. Go to realprogressives.org/donate if you'd like to help us out. We are, again, a nonprofit. You guys, any little bit helps, and we very much appreciate any help that you can give. With that, I will call it a show. I very much appreciate you all, and I look forward to seeing you next Sunday. I hope you all have a fantastic week.